In the early 1930s, Germany faced deep economic hardship and widespread uncertainty.
Millions were left without work, waiting for relief that rarely came.
Factories closed, leaving workers without security or direction. For many families, survival became a daily struggle. Frustration spread quietly through cities and towns. During times of uncertainty, public gatherings reflected the search for direction. Elections became moments of hope, fear, and division.
Democratic institutions struggled under growing pressure. Political deadlock weakened faith in traditional leadership.
Large gatherings reflected growing attention toward new leadership.
In early 1933, political power shifted through legal and formal procedures. Authority was consolidated through paperwork and administrative control.
News of the new government spread quickly through public spaces.
Public reactions were mixed, shaped by hope, doubt, and uncertainty. As night fell, uncertainty settled quietly across the country.
Within government offices, authority began to concentrate into fewer hands. Emergency laws quietly altered how power could be exercised. Across the country, people observed these changes with quiet attention.
Control over newspapers and public information steadily increased.
Visual propaganda became a constant presence in public spaces.
Radio broadcasts carried official messages into homes across the nation.
Public life became increasingly organized through approved gatherings.
Youth organizations drew younger generations into structured routines. Youth organizations drew younger generations into structured routines.
Education increasingly reflected the values promoted by the state.
Daily routines continued as people adjusted to changing conditions.
Industrial production increasingly aligned with state priorities.
Military training expanded as preparation quietly advanced. Attention increasingly turned toward Germany's borders. Abroad, responses to Germany's actions remained cautious.
Confidence grew as planning extended beyond Germany's borders.
Military presence became increasingly visible across towns and cities.
Public reactions ranged from curiosity to quiet approval.
Strategic coordination continued behind closed doors.
Economic activity increasingly focused on state-directed production.
Diplomatic discussions reflected rising unease across Europe.
For many, daily routines continued despite the changing political climate.
In 1938, German forces entered Austria without armed resistance.
In Berlin, Decisions continued to push beyond previous limits.
Across Europe, events were followed with growing concern.
In neighboring regions, pressure mounted along contested borders.
In 1938, European leaders met in Munich, seeking to preserve peace. Many hoped that compromise had secured lasting stability.
Behind the scenes, preparations continued despite diplomatic agreements.
In early 1939, German forces entered the remaining parts of Czechoslovakia.
After these events, confidence in compromise began to fade.
Quiet logistical preparations supported plans moving toward execution.
Inside many homes, life continued under a cloud of uncertainty.
News reports suggested that tensions were far from resolved.
Diplomatic efforts intensified as the situation grew more urgent.
Troop movements hinted at preparations beyond routine maneuvers.
Cities across Europe waited in quiet anticipation as daylight faded.
Along the borders, signs of strain became increasingly visible. Orders were issued as preparations moved closer to action.
As night fell, Europe edged closer to a decisive moment.
Final preparations brought long-developed plans into their last stage.
Along the borders, forces stood ready under tightening orders.
Across Europe, ordinary life continued under a growing sense of unease.
Commanders waited as final decisions drew near.
Troop movements increasingly pointed toward the eastern frontier.
For those watching, the direction of events was becoming clear. Along the eastern border, forces stood ready as the decisive hour approached. Across Europe, ordinary people sensed that a turning point was near. By 1939, Germany stood at the threshold of a path from which there would be no easy return.